Okay, well, according to my clock, it is now 7:30. Would you like to get this started? Or would you like to wait 1 or 2 more minutes?
I think we should get started.
I agree. Welcome, everyone. I am Lisa Varoxis, President of the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. We are happy to be co-hosting this candidate forum with the League of Women Voters of Falls Church. The chat feature has been disabled. Please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions you may have for the candidates. For the best viewing experience, set your view to speaker view. The option should be available at the top of your screen. If you do not see it, holding down the Alt key and pressing F1 should activate the speaker view. In speaker view, the person speaking will be in the larger picture, while the other participants will appear as thumbnail pictures at the top of your screen. This webinar is being recorded. The link to the recording will be provided on the VPIS website, www.vpis.org, as soon as the recording becomes available. The moderators tonight are Keith Thurston with VPIS and Allison Brown with the League of Women Voters Falls Church. The candidates are Debbie Hiscott, Joshua Shokoor, and Simone Tucker. I am going to mute myself and turn off my video so I'm not a distraction, and I'm going to turn it over to Keith. Go ahead, Keith.
Welcome. Thank you all for attending. And for tonight's evening, you may know that we have sponsored this type of forum in person in the past for almost 25 years. And so traditionally we're in person, of course, and it's the dynamics are a little bit different, but due to the situation, we're carrying on the tradition by Zoom. So this evening, our 3 candidates will get a round of questions. They'll have times for each of them, and they will have times, get warnings when their time is up. We're not going to be draconian about it. It's just to ensure that over the length of the entire forum, that each of the candidates get approximately the equal amount of time. And so to start off the questions, we'll go to Allison.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Allison Brown. I'm a co-president of League of Women Voters Falls Church. We're happy to have you all here. And yes, I will start. The first question, and candidate Hiscott will answer first, then candidate Shokoor, then candidate Tucker. Our first question is, please introduce yourself, your background, and your life in Falls Church. And you have up to 2 minutes to answer this question. So over to candidate Hiscott.
Thank you so much, and thank you to VPIS and the League of Women Voters of Falls Church for hosting us this evening. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. My personal background, I'm the product of public schools. I attended the University of North Carolina and London School of Economics. I have degrees in economics, industrial relations, and psychology, with an emphasis on organizational behavior. This is important because I approach my work with a lens of collaborative problem solving, which is incredibly important in City Council. My work background, I've worked for Fortune 500 company and small and mid-sized companies, as well as a sole employee of an organization. 24 years ago when I moved here, I was a senior manager in business development and corporate finance division. My daily job was to negotiate financial terms and commercial contracts. This skill set is incredibly important for budget work and large development contract work in the City Council. The last 8 years I've spent as the executive director of the Falls Church Education Foundation, and all but the last few months as a sole employee. My talent lies in creating vision and working with the volunteer board, businesses, community members, and we're able to work together to affect change. My role at the foundation has also allowed me to work daily for our community on many issues about which I'm passionate. These include, but are not limited to, education, equality, and the environment. I can come back to those if I have more time, but I also want to add that in addition to working for the Education Foundation, as a volunteer in the city, I've worked on Women's History March, Welcoming Falls Church, Special Olympics, served on the Women's Commission, volunteered at Tinner Hill Music Festival, served as a coach of youth sports and high school sports, and participated and contributed to Homestretch, Falls Church Homeless Shelter, Falls Church Arts, and Creative Cauldron. And what does that have to do with City Council? It demonstrates decades of building community. When you know what's happening in the community, and people know you and trust you, it's easier to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to candidate Shokoor. Please introduce yourself, your background, and your life in Falls Church.
How's everyone doing tonight? Thank you again, VPIS and League of Women Voters, for providing this platform during, again, unusual times. I know we wish we all could be somewhere together and do this in person. Again, I grew up in Falls Church. I'm a lifelong resident here. Went through the K-12 school system. My story is not that much different than anyone else who's ever grown up in the city of Falls Church. I played Little League. I coached basketball at the rec center. I spent my summers and summer fun at TJ and went to daycare at TJ. But my story is somewhat unique. My father immigrated to this country in the late 70s from Afghanistan, washed dishes, saved up enough money to start a business, and then purchased his first home here in Falls Church in Winter Hill. I was then raised by a single mother, both me and my sister. This kind of opportunity, I believe growing up in the city of Falls Church directly influenced my pursuit of my master's in public policy and my civic work. I have since, been on the Housing Commission here. I interned at the Department of Housing and Services, and I have been an author of the Affordable Living Policy. I'm currently running for City Council because I believe affordability is the greatest threat to Falls Church families, including people of color, teachers, city staff, and people who work around business in the city. We're looking at losing hundreds of affordable homes in the next 5 to 15 years. We've already lost most of them. In my background in affordable housing, having worked for an organization that owns the Winter Hill apartments, and now as a housing finance policy analyst for an organization that represents large public housing authorities, I believe I have the experience and the knowledge to address this issue going forward.
Thank you. And now to candidate Pass Tucker.
Thank you, Allison. And thanks to the League of Women Voters and VPIS for putting all of this together. It's nice to see everyone, though, again, despite everything that's happening in the world, as Josh said. I've lived in Falls Church City for basically my whole life as well. And I chose to return here after college with a mission to make the little city a welcoming and warm place for everyone. For people of all backgrounds, identities, and income levels. I myself am I'm Jewish. I'm a member of the LGBTQ+ community. I know what it feels like to be unrepresented in politics. And I decided to run for city council, not only to argue the positions that I care about, to fight for the environment, to fight for justice and everything that I do, but also specifically to be a voice for those who don't already have one. From a young age, my family instilled in me a deep love and appreciation for our local businesses, our parks, community center. I attended all of Falls Church public schools. I grew up reading the Falls Church News Press. And I have always considered Falls Church City to be somewhat of a haven next to the busy bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. I think that we need to focus on continuous improvement while staying true to our unpretentious, low-key, progressive values. I truly love Falls Church City, and I am proud to be from here.
Thank you very much. Now, our next question is, will you tell us a little more about your professional and or civic experience that prepares you to be on City Council? So for this question, we'll start with candidate Shokoor. Candidate Shokoor?
Again, I kind of gave that rundown before, but like I said, on top of my experience of being on the Housing Commission and working on the affordable living policy, I want to create more access to the city for people who have a story like me. And that is one reason why I didn't just get involved in my city, but I also worked to get a master's in public policy and then engage in a industry that focuses on helping residents who are the most undervalued often, or poorest and diverse among us. And that being said, during the most recent events going on in this world, in the United States over the past year, after the murder of George Floyd, I was very inspired by the youth of the city, to the point that I try to write op-eds and try to get engaged in different ways. I worked with a bunch of different people who are stakeholders in the city, and we worked on an article about how to achieve racial equity through housing, something I'm very proud of. And at that point, I was debating whether or not I was going to run for city council next year. Due to the unfortunate circumstances and the loss of Dan Z, I decided to take an opportunity to run this year. And I believe you should be engaged in your own communities to create the change you want to see. And that's why I have not just been engaged for the last several years, but I will continue to be engaged to try to make this city more accessible and welcoming to all Falls Church families.
Okay, now candidate Pass Tucker, will you tell us more about your professional or civic experience that prepares you to be on city council?
Of course. Thank you. I've dedicated my life to leadership, volunteering, and civic engagement. As a child, my family knocked on doors for Barack Obama's presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012. And over the past 8 years, I've also volunteered for state, local, and national political campaigns at various capacities. In college, I became heavily involved in progressive activism. I've volunteered and done advocacy work for J Street, J Street U, Students for Justice in Palestine, Sunrise, Planned Parenthood, and others. As an activist, community advocate, and seasoned campaign volunteer, I know how to fight for the values of Falls Church, the values that we all hold dear in our progressivism, environmentalism. I know how to, I'm driven by the belief that each of our voices matters when it comes to creating the Falls Church we want to see today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. I've fought for reproductive rights, Middle East peace, environmental justice, and progressive values. And now I've decided to run for city council, to fight for Falls Church, and to fight for you. I am not running just to run. I will be running this time. If I don't win, I'll be running in 2021. I am hoping to join various committees and boards. I really care about Falls Church City, and I want to be a voice for everyone.
Okay, and candidate Hiscott, please tell us a little more about your professional and civic experience that prepares you.
Thank you. I focused a little bit on my professional experience, my background in finance and in community collaboration. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on positions that I've held over the past 24 years here in Falls Church City. When I first moved here and I didn't have any children, I worked on the Women's Commission, which is no longer even a commission, but we worked on a program called Take Back the Night. I've served as a PTA president for the elementary school, served on boards of the middle school and the high school, and grants committee at George Mason High School. I was one of the leaders on the political action committee focused on the bond referendum to pass the bond. Yes to Falls Church was the name of the committee, and we helped to pass the $120 million bond referendum for the high school. I've spent 8 years working on the Cultural Heritage and Equity Committee team at George Mason High School. And I think it's really important that though my lived experiences as a white woman, I'm very connected and care very much about the issues of LGBTQ+ with my own family and Black, Indigenous, and people of color issues. We've brought in speakers on many of those issues to George Mason High School. We focused on changing curriculum, because I really believe that a lot of these changes need to happen within our education system. The younger our students are when they're learning, the better. I've worked and run the Alliance for Youth, which is an organization that works with police, health and human services, counselors, librarians, and school administration. Been an 8-year member of the Chamber of Commerce. Been on school naming committees. I've served for 8 years in the Business and Education Committee in my role as an Education Foundation Director, a part-time and sole employee, raised almost $2 million in 8 years to support equity, innovation, and teacher training within the Falls Church City system. I've also served as a youth lacrosse and basketball coach and a high school coach, and on a board member of a local lacrosse organization. Thank you.
Okay. One more question for each candidate. If each candidate would answer, what is your platform, or what are the key issues that you'd like to address while you're on City Council? And this time we'll start with candidate Pass Tucker.
Okay, so the 3 pillars of my platform are actually the 3 most pressing issues in Falls Church City, in my opinion. So environmentalism and sustainability is one. The second one is supporting local businesses, and the third is affordable living. So in terms of sustainability, we need to implement clean energy in all of our public buildings. We need to be actively moving towards that target. We need to move towards requiring it in all new developments, incentivize clean energy also in residential areas. In terms of local businesses need our help now more than ever. The pandemic has been hard for everyone, but unbelievably stressful for local business owners. With hundreds of thousands of small businesses closing across the United States, we cannot afford to sit idly by and allow our precious small businesses to close as well. So I've come up with a position called a small business liaison, who would be a one-person position in City Hall who would connect small business owners locally with federal funding, federal aid, and other sources of aid, particularly surrounding coronavirus, but also during normal times if that is helpful. Affordable living is essential to the future of our city. We don't want to see our older folks moving out of the city, and we don't want to see our younger folks moving out of the city, not being able to return after high school, or after college, I'm sorry. We need to keep the units that we are in danger of losing in terms of affordable housing, but that's not enough. We need to change our zoning code to allow accessory dwelling units, duplexes, townhomes, and other affordable homes.
Thank you. And now we will move to candidate Hiscott. What is your platform? What are key issues that you'd like to address when you're on City Council?
I think the first and foremost key issue is the pandemic. I'm really worried we're having some pandemic fatigue and not staying focused on that. We have immediate needs, and until we get our businesses 100% open and our kids back in school, our economy is negatively impacted. And with a negatively impacted economy, obviously, it puts constraints on our budget and doesn't allow us to do as many of the progressive things that many of us would like to pursue. I think we need to continue on focusing on loans to the small businesses and nonprofits. We've given 2 rounds of that to the businesses and nonprofits. I think we need to continue to focus on and take the temperature for those successes and rebounds. I think we need to listen to businesses. Absolutely shop local, shop local, shop local, shop local. We need to be flexible with what we allow our businesses to do, whether it's moving out into parking lots like we've been doing, listening to additional ways for them to recoup their lost revenue. We also need to work with Fairfax Health Department and our neighbors to address the health and wellness. I heard today that even the White House is worried that there's going to be another 200,000 for a total of 400,000 deaths from the pandemic. And that doesn't even include anybody who's negatively impacted, who lives through it and is negatively impacted with their health. So that's our first and foremost short-term goal we need to focus on. I agree that we also need to focus on equity and affordable housing. We're the least diverse area in the region, and we need this to change, and we need to start with housing. I work to raise funds through the Education Foundation. That's my daily job, and a lot of it goes into an area called the Fields right now. We raised $120,000 over the pandemic to support those with food insecurity. We need to solidify housing we have, utilize it most effectively, and continue to focus on affordable housing, missing middle, increased ADUs, and looking to Arlington and DC about how their accessory dwelling units have worked. Thank you very much.
Hi, turning it over to Shokoor.
You were breaking up. Say again, Allison. I believe we're on to candidate Shokoor.
Okay. So
What,
again,
can you please repeat the question? I'm sorry to interrupt, Josh. I didn't hear the question when it was breaking up.
It's the same question.
Same question.
What is the key issue?
okay. Allison, do you mind talking real quick? Because I am focused on Debbie and I can't actually see any cards.
Sure. So the question is, what is your platform, or what are the key issues that you'd like to address when you're on City Council?
Perfect. So yes, as I've mentioned over and over and over again, affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing. The current and future losses of affordable housing are the biggest policy issue in the city at this time. You know, we lost hundreds of them, and soon we're going to have 96 units of affordable housing at the fields that's going to expire through LIHTC, where you're going to have a large Hispanic community and families that are going to have nowhere else to move in the city. We as a community, and also, you know, expiration of ADUs and all the new luxury developments. We as a community must negotiate with landlords to prevent future losses of affordable housing and prioritize a higher percentage of set-asides for every new development. The second, I would say, yes, the potential loss of revenue to the city and stress to small businesses due to the economic impacts of the coronavirus is a big issue that not just we are dealing with, but you know, the whole region and the nation, all local economies are having to deal with this. And again, I would reemphasize the Live, Eat, and Shop Local campaign that you know, various people in the community have already started. You know, we should not go forward unilaterally and create policies that might hinder the growth of small businesses or the recuperation of revenue for small businesses during this time. But also at the same point, I want to commend the efforts of the Department of Housing and Human Services, who have provided rental assistance to 45 families on some more than once during this time, and have provided food, have paid utility bills, which are often overlooked, for over 50 families. But my third main issue is a lack of diversity and inclusivity and threats to a vision becoming a more welcoming and inclusive community for Falls Church. You know, we need to create a racial equity commission that can look at policies through a lens of racial equity, and we should look at potentially teaching our kids the history of Falls Church, the true history, so we don't otherize segregation and discrimination to Alabama, Missouri, or Mississippi, but it's actually our backyard.
Thank you all very much. Those were the introductory and the biography type questions that we had for you. In addition, we have quite a few more we're going to ask. For our audience watching, there is a button at the bottom that says Q&A, and you can insert your own question. We have the ones that you may typically think of, but if you have something that's unusual that you think we won't include, please put it in the questions and answer at the bottom, and our moderators will see it. We'll work it in throughout the forum to the degree that we can fit them all in. So each of you spoke about affordable housing, and so I'm going to pick up there and ask you to say some more about it. One of the things that's been occurring in affordable housing is we have been getting ADUs, and those ADUs have had sunset clauses on them. So they lasted 15, 20 years, and then they go back to market rated units. What would you do in order to address the expiration of ADUs within the city. And at this point, we pick up with candidate Hiscott. 2 minutes.
Pardon me, how long?
2 minutes.
Okay, so the question specifically though was about what to do about the sunset clauses at market rate that are about the buildings that are going to have sunset clauses. And I do believe.
And those that are in the future that are coming into the city.
I do believe there's a recommendation actually from what Josh has written about expanding that and making sure that when new units come in, new ADUs come in, that there is no longer a sunset clause, that they are going to be in perpetuity essentially. And I'm sure Josh can give us some more details on that. Additionally, you know, just to add to the affordable housing, we do have some affordable ADUs that are not being utilized well. I think there are some that are empty right now in Falls Church City. So there are many that are coming offline, but several of the ones that are online, we need to work on more effectively getting our teachers and our city staff into those so that we're making best use of the ones we already have. Additionally, we need to talk about the fields and what's going to happen with those residents, as Josh mentioned, and those are families that we work with really routinely on providing not only the $120,000 in food, but clothing, Wi-Fi, access to emergency healthcare, rent, etc. So I think that it's multifaceted. We need to ensure that the ones that are coming on are not sunsettable, if that's even a word, and then focus on those that we already do have, ones we are underutilizing and ones we know they're going to be coming offline. And we'll need to focus on how we're going to replace those and expand them within the community to support affordable housing.
Thank you. Candidate Shokoor.
Yeah, so again, in every new development, we passed an affordable living policy that there are no more covenants on ADUs, and that's been accepted by council. So from now on, say at Mason End, those will be in perpetuity. However, you know, in the developments like the Byron, the Spectrum, West Broad, et cetera, those do have expiring covenants on them. And we're looking about around 100 home ownership and rental, and that's also Northgate and everything. So yeah, over 100 units that will expire here in the next 10 to 15 years or so. So it's gonna be a problem we're gonna have to address again. You know, I think the rebuilding is next up, and they're gonna, you know, that's gonna be about 9 affordable units that are gonna expire in about 2 years. This gives us an opportunity to be creative and to work together. You know, this is an issue that we're gonna have going forward, so let's start now. Let's think about how we can preserve these units, whether that is through working with Fairfax Housing Authority when we start partnering with them and potentially use vouchers and have them accepted. You know, I find it interesting that one of the only developments in the city that accepts housing vouchers is the Winter Hill Apartments. You know, we should try and work with landlords and negotiate, can you accept housing vouchers to cover the rent that the market rate's gonna you know, jack up for these residents to keep these teachers in these units. But this gives us an opportunity to be really creative, and I look forward to working on it in whatever capacity going forward. But it's an issue, and you know, we don't want to be exclusive and start allowing people to be kicked out of their own homes because they can't afford to live there anymore. They've been living there for years.
Thank you. Candidate Tucker.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good thing that City Council has done away with the sunset clauses. But it is a huge concern that so many of our affordable units are expiring. You know, we need to be looking into more ways that we can implement affordable housing than just new developments. We need to be increasing our Section 8 housing. We need to be, you know, looking at using vouchers more widely, as Josh said. I think it would be really great to have dedicated workforce housing for our teachers and for our police officers. Studies show that actually policing is more effective when police live in their communities, and that's another way that we can, you know, work towards equity in housing. We also desperately need some changes to our zoning code to allow ADUs, to, you know, allow duplexes and townhomes, and we can definitely do with some more incentivizing of affordable units for incoming developers. We can up the requirements of affordable units and prioritize those who deliver on that. And again, I think, really focusing in on expanding the amount of people that accept these vouchers is extremely important, because that is a really crucial way to increase affordable housing without developing further.
One of the questions that came in from the audience works into this subject matter, and it talks about the issue of large houses on small lots in Falls Church. That has an impact in two ways. One way is that it reduces the amount of space for trees, for planting, and increases the amount of hard surfaces for water runoff and flooding. But also, it moves us into the very large homes that are affordable by only a small percentage of the population. How do you see that this issue fits in the issue of affordability for Falls Church, the large houses on small lots? And this one we start with, it's like we start with candidate Pass Tucker.
Okay, I'm so sorry, could you repeat the question really quickly? There was a lot of background info. I want to make sure I cover everything.
Sure, it's the issue of large houses on small lots in Falls Church and how that is impacting not only environmentally, but for the affordability of the city of the very large homes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith. That is a huge concern. I definitely think that we need to preserve the homes we already have, which are the smaller cottage type homes that were built in, the 40s and 50s. I live in one of those houses, and I think it's adorable. I love it. I think that there is a real concern in terms of stormwater runoff from these larger developments and having such a large impermeable surface. I think if you are going to increase the amount of lot coverage, you definitely need to be increasing somehow the ground cover that is able to absorb the stormwater. So an easy way to do that is to implement green roofing and incentivize it for people who want to do those knockdown projects, because those are already extremely expensive projects. I don't think that that's a huge ask. It's also important to think about how such large homes impact the affordability of Falls Church because of how much land a single home is taking up. There could be 2 or 3 homes in that same space that would have a smaller environmental impact than the one giant home that's been built. I know there's been issues with people's basements flooding. I know that our floodplain is rapidly expanding, and I think this is really a lot more serious than a lot of folks are giving this issue credit for. Everybody wants to have their dream house, and I think that to an extent we can do that without compromising, the environment and affordability and all of that. I think we can do both. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on to candidate Hiscott.
Thank you. I agree that incentivization of building in Falls Church City is going to really make a difference if builders are incented to make their new buildings, which they're going to continue to build, obviously, in Falls Church City, because that has been where the demand and the return on investment for a builder has been. I think that we need to relook at our policies on how we incentivize builders for acting increasingly green. We've made some changes, like, you see many of the houses have pervious surfaces. They might have just 2 tracks for a driveway, for instance, rather than a fully paved lot. Those are some small steps we can take. I also think this goes back to using lots well. For instance, my own house, my own lot is completely pervious. There are no trees taken down. Our house was literally lifted over the trees as a modular house to not impact any of the environment on our particular lot. However, if we were to sell it, I'm sure our house would be raised, and either one gigantic or two large houses would be put in place, and probably all the trees taken down. And I think there are a lot of things we can do for lots like mine to incent, looking again at the zoning laws and accessory dwelling units. I have elderly parents whom I would love to house in my backyard. They live in Rochester, New York, and selling their home, they would never be able to buy anything in Falls Church City. So I'm acutely aware of the affordability. And I'd love to have an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard where I could house them. It would provide additional space. It would bring in a different socioeconomic level, different age level, with minimal impact on city services and clearly no impact on school services. And I think cases like that would be much better for our environment than having, one very large house built. But we can make, we can look at zoning, we can look at encouragements. We also have a stormwater task force that has been really researching the issue, and I look to see what they bring back and suggestions they have on how we can continue to work on this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Shokoor.
So stormwater issues are a critical problem for hundreds of Falls Church families. And I know the Stormwater Task Force is recommending X amount of millions of dollars to expand pipes to try to take care of this issue. But this might be putting a Band-Aid on a greater issue. And that goes back to your question about tear downs and buildups. This has a direct impact on stormwater runoff, removing pervious surfaces and existing trees that are often better at absorbing water than new ones that are planted. But when it comes to just preserving certain tree canopy, we have done a lot when it comes to mandating that 20% of tree canopy must be done on these single family developments within 10 years. But when it comes to trying to prevent this or incentivizing this kind of pervious surface creation or keeping certain tree canopy, we can potentially provide tax credits, which I think could do a lot. Unfortunately, Virginia restricts a lot of policies that we can do through state laws. I would also go back to your question about affordability. Tear downs and buildups, that jacks up the tax assessment for everyone else. And that's a problem for empty nesters and older people who are surviving on $12,000 of Social Security every year. How do they pay an $8,000 property tax? This is an issue that then we have to provide tax relief and abatements for, which I think are a great thing, and it's a great policy weapon to try to mitigate these issues towards empty nesters. But it directly affects young people like myself too, with a single income. I want to be able to stay in this community. I want everyone to be able to not be forced to move just because taxes go up. So it's going to take more investigation and more work to do ahead.
Thank you. So I want to dig a little deeper on that, because obviously the issue of looking at zoning and so on, that lots of work has been done on this, and we have a 35% maximum coverage for all hardscape. We have a 25% maximum for the house size. So, and we have the stormwater fees where we give credits for homeowners that do something on their property. And the argument from many homeowners is the minor amount of credit that I would get on the stormwater fee is negligible. It doesn't really have the payoff for me to put in a rain garden or a green roof or something that really makes a difference. So knowing that this kind of work is being done, let's go back around for 1 minute. Like, what would you do that really would introduce something that was new that could make a difference in this space? And we are with candidate Hiscott.
Thank you. I think that with many things, it all begins with education. I focused on environmental issues and education issues at Falls Church Illustrated by working on the legal net zero geothermal new high school. And I've also been in conversations with Falls Church City Public Schools and Virginia Tech and local areas on a sustainability academy, the potential of having true sustainability being taught from the earliest levels in Falls Church City schools. And as many of you know, many of you who might be parents or of my generation know that you're taught a lot by your children. And my own daughter has gone into geotechnical engineering through her experiences in Falls Church City, and is focusing on getting a master's in basically trash remediation. So learned a lot through that. I think education is key. I think the financial incentives haven't proven particularly effective. So I think bringing along additional education sources. I know VPIS works on the habitat restoration and working on getting even younger and younger people involved in that from a really early age, and that makes a huge difference. So I think we're gonna have to continue to focus on education, continue to focus on societal issues, and making sure that it's perceived as doing well and doing right by our community and by the greater community writ large. As evidenced by it being Climate Week, we need to really focus on this in the next and foreseeable future. Thank you.
Okay, Shokoor.
Yeah, so I would say one, let's look again at tax credits and see what we can be doing to change it up, to incentivize. But the change we want to happen can't really happen locally. We have to go to the state legislature and talk to our representatives down there to try to create a change so we can start doing the kind of things we need to do when it comes to housing. And that comes to limiting the development on certain square footage, to provide different zoning options where we can get duplexes and accessory dwelling units in. I know the state legislature introduced a rezoning, ending single family zoning throughout the state at the end of the last session in 2019. It wasn't picked up. Hopefully it's going to be introduced again. But we need to use our city's bully pulpit and influence to try to get these kind of changes done at the state level, so then we can be better equipped to handle them locally.
Thank you. Candidate Pass Tucker.
Thank you. Our floodplain desperately needs addressing. I think, the stormwater fees ought to be proportionally graduated based on environmental impact, rather than just having a credit for those who do extra. I think that those who do a disproportional amount of harm should pay more than those who have done nothing to impact the stormwater, but not to say that they shouldn't pay anything. I also think, like I said before, that green roofing is a great way to, have a larger home, but still keep in mind our floodplain expanding, and really look into ways to mitigate the runoff while we are trying to have our modern luxuries, I'll say. I think that in terms of, the development on Route 7 and Route 29, I think we need to be definitely paying more attention to the runoff that is caused by those projects, because it is not just residential building that comes into play here. And it would be probably more financially feasible for large corporations to build green roofing on top of their buildings, especially since they're new.
Thank you. Likewise, are there other changes that you notice in zoning that would be a benefit to either the environment or affordable housing, that you've seen elsewhere, or that you've seen in Falls Church, which is something that we do not want to repeat again? And at this point, we are with candidate Shokoor.
Yeah, I mean, again, as I think has been echoed by all the candidates, we would like to end single-family zoning in the city, or look at creating duplexes, various diverse types of housing when it comes to sizes and how they look. That's to attempt to try to create a natural, affordable housing in the city. I understand. I, on the other hand, am kind of skeptical. I don't know if the laws of supply and demand will work that well here in the city of Falls Church. I'd be surprised if they do. But we do have that missing middle that I think that changing the zoning laws and easing them will allow for us to create. I think accessory dwelling units are a good thing, especially for empty nesters who might need extra income to pay for those higher tax assessments. If we could look at potentially exempting their tax by having an accessory dwelling unit, or not raising it, so that they are able to have maybe a family member move back in, or a new person who wants to live in the city to help subsidize their tax assessment. I think I'm all for that. I would love that. I think in the future we need to, when it comes to the fields, that's going to be an issue that we're going to have to deal with when it comes to zoning too, because you have a developer there who wants to sell for profit and build, we don't know what, maybe a bunch of townhomes, I don't know. So we got to look at potentially using our weapons of zoning to either incentivize the maintaining of the 96 affordable units, restricting the developer from creating for-profit townhomes, market rate.
Thank you. Candidate Hiscott. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I just muted myself. Just to restate and echo some of the zoning laws that can be changed to add things like accessory dwelling units, like I mentioned, of having my parents, and I can see a cycle where next year I'm an empty nester, perhaps when my parents no longer need that accessory dwelling unit, my children can come back into our main home, and then my husband and I move into that accessory dwelling unit. So a way to keep things intergenerational, perhaps, and if they're not interested in moving back into Falls Church City for whatever reason, then perhaps that's an opportunity to have teacher housing, workforce housing, different types of opportunities for people to move in. And like I mentioned, we have some examples to look at in Arlington and in Washington, D.C. to see how those have been, to determine what the consequences of that type of building would be. We have a lot of regional experience upon which we can lean. The same with Arlington, with a lot of their the ADUs, the affordable dwelling units, how they've interspersed them a little bit more effectively than we have. I think we can look to some of those successes in Arlington and address our zoning policies that will make it more favorable to be able to add that multiple types of housing into Falls Church City. And like we've discussed, kind of the missing middle. We've talked about, the cottages that were built. I always thought that was a fascinating idea. To have an area for 55 and older. So again, your impact on city services is relatively negligible. That's not affordable housing, but it's providing additional types of housing. And the additional types of housing provide a different demographic and different socioeconomic background. It provides as a continuum where it's not, one end of the spectrum or the other. I was raised in a city that had Section 8 housing, all the way through executive housing for IBM, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb executives. And I think that community was really beautiful to see the graduated spectrum and continuum of housing. And that really hasn't existed here. And that's where I see a lot of the challenges we have, kind of the barbell and the missing middle right there. And when you have the middle type of housing and you have a variety of socioeconomic status, it's a lot easier for those folks who may be on one or the other to see how they can move up or down in that continuum. And it provides a really positive experience based upon my own.
Thank you. Candidate Pass Tucker.
Thank you. So zoning is absolutely crucial to look into. It is a really, really great way that we can enact changes. So currently, we have 20% tree coverage in new developments after 10 years is the requirement. That definitely needs to be increased to at least 30, hopefully eventually going further than that. This can be strengthened to benefit the residents of Falls Church City. We can focus on indigenous species, which would allow for more sustainable plantings, less maintenance from the city. So it would be cheaper in the long run. So there aren't currently any Virginia laws to protect mature trees, but cities are allowed to make their own regulations in regards to that. So we definitely should have regulations. It's really sad to see the loss of some of our tree coverage with these new developments coming in and with these knockdown projects happening. You know, really old, really large trees are being ripped out, and it is heartbreaking. In terms of affordability and community, I think a really great place to look for examples of what we can do with our zoning code is an organization called Strong Towns. I have done a lot of research into Strong Towns. I'm a big fan. They come up with this idea of a 15-minute city. They're proponents of accessory dwelling units, accessory commercial units, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's super important. There's a lot of examples in Canada. I can't remember the specific cities, but they have had a lot of luck with ADUs and ACUs in terms of diversifying the local business. Zoning is also very important for equity issues. It's actually a legacy of segregation. When segregation was outlawed, a lot of suburban communities said, oh, we still want that. Let's have single family home zoning. So actually, it is important, again, you know, to address these issues, the history behind them. And so opening that up is also helping with equity issues. If we change the zoning to allow individuals to operate a business out of their home with more than 2, I believe, employees, maybe it's 1 outside of the immediate family, that would lower the cost barrier for opening a small business in Falls Church City, which personally I have been in the process of, have done, and it is extremely difficult. If I was allowed to have employees and operate my business more fully out of my home, it would make more sales tax revenue for Falls Church City, and it would allow me to grow my business, and it would allow for more upwards mobility. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on those questions on each of you for one area. So for candidate Pass Tucker, so the issue, do you realize, of having businesses in residential neighborhoods is mostly an issue of parking and the tranquil residence environment that people thought they bought, and for a business to be operating next door. How would you rationalize those two concepts where we're protecting the quality of life in a neighborhood while allowing someone to operate a business amongst it? 1 minute.
Thank you. That's so important to clarify. Yeah, so we definitely, in terms of operating a business out of the home, we would have to specify in the zoning code, specifically very well outlined parking and all that sort of stuff. I think in terms of the cities that I was looking at, they focused on the businesses being more community oriented. So the ACUs are more so small businesses. They're not things that would necessarily attract large groups of people at a time, right? So I have a candle business. That's not going to attract more than 1 or 2 people at a time. And again, similarly, you could have a pottery studio, whatever it may be. There won't be a high influx of traffic likely to happen, and we can preempt that by being very specific in our zoning.
Thank you. Candidate Hiscott, You mentioned the accessory dwelling units in the backyard, and you do realize that they increase density and then are an impact on the environment. As long as you stay within the 25% lot coverage, then it may pass that legal muster. But then when the house becomes for sale, then the lot and the house are a higher price because it has an income producing unit attached to it. And also the issue of parking of cars to support those units. How do you rationalize those?
Question, could you last I heard? Sorry, Keith, it just got cut off.
I'm sorry, so the affordable dwelling units in the backyard, or accessory dwelling units, increase impervious surface and increase parking and drive up the price of the homes in the neighborhood because they're income producing units. How do you rationalize vehicles, environment, and the benefit of an accessory dwelling for a family or relatives?
I think well, it doesn't have to be family or relatives. That was just an example that I use when thinking through it myself. And that's why I reference looking to what has happened in Arlington and DC. It may not be the approach we want to take, but I think it's worth reviewing and looking at. I also think we really need to think about not just, well, how do we work collaboratively? How do we work collaboratively with neighborhood representation? How do we work collaboratively with our stewards, our best stewards of our environment, many of our boards and commissions that do an extensive amount of work that can provide feedback on the feasibility of this type of zoning. We're going to have to make some difficult decisions about affordable housing and options that where the homeowner makes the financial investment. Because in our short term, of course, with our the current economy, we may not be able to make any additional investments from a city budget level, or we'll have to get input from the community, from the city, to see residents in the city to see if we make cuts in our current budget to then pay for some of the affordable housing. So it's an idea. It has worked elsewhere. I would have to see what the impacts of that are. But I also really want to seek input from community members, from people who may already have crowded streets and may not be as interested to do that. So if not that, then what? How do we quickly address some types of affordable housing? So, there's some that would argue that having an additional accessory dwelling unit drives prices of homes down in the neighborhood because it's crowding or adding additional parking. So I've heard both arguments on that particular issue, and I would look to others who have been successful and see how we can adapt it within our community by working through boards, commissions, and those who have extensive experience on this area. Thank you.
Thanks. And candidate Shokoor, the same question. You've mentioned accessory dwelling units and different styles of housing. How do you make that trade-off on the environmental impact, cars, and the neighbors?
Again, I'm not necessarily, I'm for accessory dwelling units, but not to the extent that other candidates might be. I think, in general, cars on streets, there's going to be, many houses. I live in Winter Hill, so I don't have a car. I sold my car 2 years ago. I bike everywhere, but many homes in Winter Hill even have 2 or 3 cars. That's a personal choice, and they have to then pay a tag or it's like a car tax, or so they have to have a tag on the car that shows that they live there and they have to pay for it. Well, if parking becomes such an issue in those lots where we do duplexes or accessory dwelling units, then maybe we can look at something like that. When I envision accessory dwelling units, I'm envisioning, turning a garage into a home for your kid. I think, I'm fortunate enough to have gone through the school system and grown up here in the city of Falls Church, and to be able to be here right now running for city council. I might be potentially the only, or if I would win, I'd potentially be the first George Mason High School graduate to serve on city council. Many of my peers were never able to come back into the city because they couldn't afford it. And so they couldn't invest into the community that invested so heavily in them. That's where I see accessory dwelling units as an opportunity for these individuals who grew up through the school system to re-access the school system and be a part of the community and build a family in which they grew up and they were raised. The kids that could share the same experience that they did. But the reality is that that's just not possible today. And it's not possible until we actually make policy steps to create a more accessible and less exclusive community. And I feel like I have the policy background, the knowledge to be able to do that. And I think accessory dwelling units and easing zoning restrictions to create duplexes and middle housing is another way to allow for people to re-access this community.
Thank you. At this point, we'll pass it to Allison to ask some questions. And I noticed in the Q&A, we're getting budget questions and things of that nature. We will pick those up, but we'll go with Allison for quite a while. Thanks, Allison.
Okay, well, I have an audience question. So how, when, many people are in Falls Church City because of the schools, what do you see as the biggest issue facing the schools? And what is your experience that would, give you the background to decide, especially on budget issues for the schools, that you would on city council? So first we will go to candidate Hiscott on that question.
Thank you. So the first part of that question, what is the biggest issue facing the schools? And then the second question is about how that would apply in the budget cycle. Did I get that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So in my role as executive director of the Falls Church Education Foundation, I'm focusing on school budgets and what's missing from school budgets all the time. My job is not to supplant any budget that the schools spend, but to provide extra for equity, for teachers, for innovation. I'm very familiar with budgets. I've been watching the school budget for 15 years. I work cooperatively in the Falls Church City Public Schools to determine how we can continue to support them. I think the issues that face the schools are clearly, first and foremost, COVID. We have got to figure out how we can best get our kids back into school. It's stressful for the students, whether they're kindergarten or seniors. It's stressful for the families that are trying to figure out childcare, accessibility. It's stressful for the teachers. The teachers want to be with their students. They want to be there in person and in class on the daily. So it's working through the COVID issues, it's working through safety and security, and then it's going to be working on what happened this year with the school budgets was before pre-COVID, the schools were proposing to City Council a cost of living increase and a step increase to teacher salaries, which seemed like it was going to be within budget guidance from City Council until COVID hit. And then obviously we took a cut off of both city side and school side and didn't give teachers a COLA or a increase in step pay. This year has been incredibly stressful for teachers. So I think the biggest school budget is going to be how we address, are we able to give any increases in pay or cost of living adjustments in the next FY 2022 budget, which we'll start working on in November. So thank you.
Okay, candidate Shokoor.
So as I said before, I grew up through the schools. I went through the school system here. But I would definitely agree that COVID and the impact of the pandemic is probably the greatest threat facing the school. Whether or not that is how well are children are learning? Is there learning loss that's going on? I know oftentimes in summer there's summer learning loss. Is there learning loss that's going on in the education for kids? Which again, this is something that's going to be experienced through not just Falls Church, but the whole nation region. And then readapting and how do we open up schools for kids safely for teachers and kids to both attend. I'm try to be an optimist But, I realistically, this pandemic is still going on. And, it could be a while before school opens back up safely. And then again, I would also say the budget probably. Again, we are taking a major hit in terms of tax revenue in the city. And so just maintaining a budget, that's been allowed every year or sign off on, I think that's going to be a critical issue for the school system going forward as well.
Candidate Pass Tucker?
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree with the other two candidates that COVID is a major issue facing the schools right now, obviously. But I know no one wants to hear this, but I really don't think we're ready to go back in person. We still do have a pandemic. And, I think that it's best if we look at this creatively. What can we do aside from going back to in-person classrooms in a tight, stuffy room without enough space for people to social distance? Can we maybe organize communally, neighborhood by neighborhood? Can we divvy up things that way, teach classes in parks, in backyards? We really need to be thinking about this, again, creatively. But I don't think that, existentially, that's the biggest threat facing our schools. I think that the biggest threat facing our schools is expanding non-academic learning resources for people of all ages. I think training our kids for the economy of the future and closing that opportunity gap, focusing also on life skills as well as academia. Like Josh, I also graduated from George Mason, attended all of Falls Church City's public schools. Our young people, most of us can't afford to move back, despite how much we might want to. We definitely need more extracurriculars, more classes focused on training and upskilling young people. We need to offer more financial literacy programs, especially in terms of opening small businesses, really going forward. We also need more trade classes, and, okay, sorry.
Okay, and now we will turn to some budget issues. We'd like to hear from each of you. How do you propose funding or financing the proposals that you've made tonight? So for this question, we'll start with candidate Shokoor.
Well, again, I think the two main proposals I was pushing for tonight, we're increasing talking about accessories all the time, affordable dwelling units in every new development. And that is not as much a cost to us as it is a cost to the developer. And we've been getting 6%. 6% is not much, and it's much lower than anyone else in the entire region. We can push for 20%. Maybe we'll end up with 10. But the main sacrifice comes then when we have to prioritize this as the main issue, that we want 20% of affordable dwelling units in this building. And so we'll have to sacrifice certain proffers / voluntary concessions for other things. There's going to be consequences, and tough decisions have to be made. But if we're going to prioritize this as a major issue, then that's something that can be done with little cost to any city resident. I would then, when it comes to preserving affordable housing that we're about to lose, whether it's the fields, that's going to be an opportunity where we need to negotiate with the owner. And again, I don't see how much that will cost that much. I believe, if we can ease the rezoning there, it can make up the loss for that developer. And if we do market rate and keep the affordable, it could subsidize the loss in the affordable, and it can do another live tech deal. So we wouldn't have to be able to pay much at all, if anything. And then when it comes to the preservation of the affordable dwelling units in the city, we can look to Fairfax Housing Authority to do vouchers. But also that might cost us money, and we would have to look into the budget or provide a housing trust fund to be able to pay for those units to remain affordable.
Okay, candidate Pass Tucker.
Thanks. So the great thing about most of my ideas is that they don't cost the city anything. Most of them are changes to zoning laws, or, you know, incentivization of developers, stuff like that. But for, you know, affordable housing and in terms of the other things that do cost the city money, we need to be asking incoming developers to have higher percentages of commercial space in their projects. You know, we keep having developers moving in saying they're going to provide 40% commercial space and then not following through on that because it's too difficult. I think we need to press them harder because we don't make enough from sales tax. That's why our property taxes are so high. We need to increase our commercial tax rate, but not for small businesses. As Josh was saying, that is a great idea. I think that we may not even have to do that though if we increase the amount of businesses in Falls Church, because that will automatically increase the sales tax revenue. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Candidate Hiscott.
Thank you. This city council position is for a one-year term. That's why I've been focusing on the pandemic as our first and foremost issue. We have to get through this pandemic for the health of our citizens and for the health of the economy. The amount of revenue we bring in through this pandemic will be defining not only the budget for this 1 year, for which for which this council person will be elected, but as we witnessed in 2008, it'll probably be a 12 to 18 month lag in revenues. So we're really going to have to focus on the existing budget. Now, the existing budget, we can make some trade-offs if the community's will is that we should be investing in some of these ideas we've all been sharing. They do cost money. If developers give on ADUs, then you're right, they don't give the same amount in proffers to the library, to the schools, to City Health and Human Services. There is a cost to that. There's also a cost to changing zoning in the sense that there could be a cost to the environment, there could be a cost to the community for parking, there could be a number of costs there. So this is a puzzle. This is a puzzle with a finite revenue that we will learn pretty soon. And we'll have to be making some really tough decisions on how we balance out the income versus our expense, specifically with this 1 year term, and then be planting the seeds for continuing growth for the next, the next 4 years after that, for the next council, for the next council after that. So I think it's really tough. It's a tough question, and tough decisions will have to be made. There aren't easy pockets of funding for any of these ideas. In the next year, it will come at the expense of something else. These are tough decisions, and that's why I think, 24 years in the city and watching the budget and having that experience and having lived through some really tough times, I understand what those trade-offs may or may not be. I think it's important that we look at our current budget, we look at the revenue, and then we focus on what we can do and plant the seeds for future expenditures, because all of these ideas will cost money. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question recognizes that we are at the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. How will you make Falls Church City a place that's accessible for all, particularly people with disabilities? And also, we'd like to combine this with a question about sidewalks and getting around Falls Church City in particular. So in terms of how you can City Council help make Falls Church more accessible in that way. So here we'll start with candidate Pass Tucker.
Thanks, Allison. And I just wanted to quickly note that I do know everything costs money. I just meant that my plans in particular are not going to be a particularly large strain on the budget. I have planned them that way. So in terms of making Falls Church City more accessible, I definitely think sidewalks are a great place to start. We don't have enough ramps on our sidewalks. I have been walking places time and time again and noticed that it just ends abruptly, no ramp, which is not okay. It shows a complete lack of regard for our citizens with disabilities. I think we need to be focusing on, again, our marginalized communities. Everyone who lives in Falls Church should have a voice. So, I mean, you know, as someone who does not have a physical disability, I don't think that I am the most qualified person to say what would help them the most, but I can give you my ideas. So lots more ramps, I think, would be helpful. I do think that, you know, more crosswalks would also be helpful. And yeah, I think just listening to people that have disabilities is the most important thing here, because fundamentally I do not fall into that category. Thanks.
Thank you. Candidate Hiscott?
Thank you. In addition to the sidewalks and the improving our trail system, moving it to a dual tracking where I think you can separate the bikes from the walkers. And that's really important if you're in a wheelchair or a scooter or some other type of transportation, to eliminate the fast-paced biking. I know that there are people I know who are in scooters and in wheelchairs. It's very difficult to go on the main section of WNOD trail when there are bikers that are flying by. So I love the Regional Parks Authority, collaborating with Regional Park Authority and doing dual tracking for our trails. I also work a third of my day job is focusing on equity of access to education, and that's working extensively with the special education students and the life skills students through Falls Church City Public Schools. And I've been fortunate to have an opportunity to work with a lot of psychologists, social workers, OT, PT, working with these particular students and how we train them up to provide job opportunities for them. So working within the community, working with small businesses, we have small businesses who work with those students and have them in their facilities, taking on not only earning money, but learning life skills to be able to support themselves or be as independent as possible. I think we also need to look to small businesses that are in Falls Church City. We have a company here who is focused solely on providing work for those who may have handicaps and disabilities that might prevent them from being hired otherwise. They work with federal contractors and work with all types of disabilities, physical, mental, emotional, otherwise, and find employment for them. So there's a lot of partnership and collaboration we can do in Falls Church City through our businesses, through our school system, and then just collaborating with those who fall into that category so we can find out from them what do they really need. Definitely sidewalks, I totally agree, those drop off in places, as well as our utility poles kind of plug up the clear path. Oftentimes you have to drop off the sidewalk and get to the street to pass by those particular utility poles. So that's a real challenge if you are disabled, and it's a struggle. Thank you very much.
Candidate Shokoor?
Yeah, so I think we should try to understand what the main issues are for people with disabilities in our community. And I know a big problem has continuously been housing, and housing with infrastructure built in to be the most convenient and easy to navigate for people with disabilities. Winter Hill Apartments here, which my organization owned, my former organization owned, has people in there with disabilities and tons of ramps going all around, providing access and easy access to these homes. The Miller House, this was a project of a rundown house on the church property on Washington Street. Department of Housing and Human Services worked with a nonprofit and the church to build independent/assisted living for 4 or 5 individual handicaps to live there. So they could leave the nest and go live in a home with other individuals, and ADUs in the city, affordable dwelling units. We have affordable dwelling units with people with handicapped or just who are handicapped or disabled. Oftentimes we forget that the income strains of individuals who are handicapped or disabled. On top of all that, of course, sidewalk maintenance, not just on Broad Street, and increased street lights for safety. I think on top of that, traffic calming when it comes to crossing the streets, and more crosswalks on Broad Street that provide audio and visual signals to show that it's safe to cross, similar to the one that's on Washington and Broad. I think these are some great steps, and we've done a lot already, and we can do a lot more. And I think that begins with a conversation.
Thank you very much. And I will say that we're not going to be able to get to all of the audience questions because we have a very engaged audience who has been sending us some great questions. And we are getting close to the close of this program. We are going to give each candidate 2 minutes for closing remarks. So each candidate will now get the floor for 2 minutes to really address any issue that you'd like to address in terms of getting back to something that came up tonight or something else that you just didn't get to yet tonight. So for this, we're going to start with candidate Hiscott. Over to you.
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters of Falls Church and the VPIS for hosting this event. And thanks to all who have taken the time this evening to join us. Thanks to Josh and Simone and all of our engaged citizens for such active participation in democracy. As evidenced by, I just read, we have 11.3% voter turnout as of 4 p.m. today. That's huge. Just to have a couple days in and already have that high of a turnout. Again, our short-term priority as a city is to continue to work together through the pandemic. Our personal health and the health of our economy are paramount. The stronger the economy in Falls Church City, the more we're able to accomplish together. Additional parallel priorities include West Falls Church development, affordable housing, equity, and environmental progress. This in conjunction with supporting strong city services and schools. If elected, I will lean on my decades of experience in budgeting, finance, and strategic planning. I will also lean into the depth and breadth of many years of developing relationships, both personal and professional, to work on issues most important to our citizens. My strengths also lie in team building and collaborative problem solving. I've been around long enough to see the ups and downs of our city and school budgets. I'm well versed on the tough decisions that have to be made. While it is critical to focus on the next budget cycle, it is also imperative that we not lose sight of continuing that equally, if not more important work. We must continue to take action and to plant the seeds of progress. I have ideas, I have passion, but most importantly, I have experience. Experience is critically important in this juncture in governing in Falls Church City. I'm the complete candidate with all three. Please vote for me for City Council. You can vote in person from 9 to 4 at City Hall or use the drop box for your ballot. And thank you again for joining us this evening.
Candidate Shokoor, any closing remarks?
I just want to echo what Debbie said. Thank you so much, League of Women Voters and VPIS, for putting this platform together. I know we all truly appreciate it, and especially everyone who attended and were able to hear us discuss the issues that matter most to you and us. I want to also commend my fellow candidates for the campaign we're all running. This is unprecedented times, from a special election to a pandemic to, again, as you mentioned, 11% early voting. This is, again, unprecedented. So it's been an interesting experience, and it will continue to be one. So I just want to emphasize again, where you live matters. I was provided access as a second-generation American because my father bought our home here in Winter Hill for $30,000. Is now jumped up 2,000 times that value since then. Me and my sister were both raised by a single mother on a single income. But growing up in this city directly influenced my life outcomes and gave me an opportunity to pursue a higher education a master's of public policy and involved myself in civic work in my community because I wanted other people to get the same opportunity I was given. I work in affordable housing because I want these for not just my community, but for everybody. And, you know, I'm a housing finance policy analyst for an organization that represents the largest public housing authorities in America. And I spent the last few years working on housing and equity issues in the city. Now I'm running for city council to help fulfill the vision we have set for ourselves. I believe together we can turn words into action and promises into policy. Together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And now candidate Pass Tucker, your closing remarks.
Thanks, Allison. Thank you again to the League of Women Voters and the Village Preservation and Improvement Society for all of your work in the community and for organizing this event specifically. I have a wide variety of experience in activism and the professional world. I have concrete plans in all corners of my platform, and I think it's important to take that into account when you're voting for someone. Fundamentally, though, this is not about me. It isn't about any of the candidates. It's about the citizens of Falls Church and the future we want to build for them, the future we want to build for our children, for our children's children. I'm fighting for a more diverse, equitable, sustainable, eco-friendly, and safe future for everyone that lives here. I want to take some time out of my closing statement to address climate change for a second, because I think that it is existentially the most pressing issue that we're facing. It's going to cost millions of dollars and even more lives. We need to take action now before it's too late. And I am worried that we are not taking this seriously enough, that this is not a big enough issue. I wonder every day if I'll even be able to have children because we're running out of time. To my knowledge, I'm the only candidate who has signed the Green New Deal pledge, made environmentalism a key component of their platform, and put forth actual policy ideas to help us win this fight. We need to implement green energy in all of our government buildings and work towards requiring all incoming development to be carbon neutral. We need to implement measures towards green roofing, proportional graduated stormwater fees, more stormwater management initiatives, increasing the necessary tree coverage on developing lots, planting native flora. We are at a unique point in time right now. And Falls Church City is overwhelmingly liberal, overwhelmingly supports environmentalism. So I guess it's just confusing to me why we haven't done more. And I really believe—
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we thank all of our candidates for participating. For our viewers, if there is a candidate booklet on VPIS.org where you can see questions that each of the candidates have answered in writing, which are somewhat different than the ones we had tonight, which will be interesting for you. This videotape will be on YouTube, and we'll send the link out through the same channels that we did and market that through the League of Women Voters and through the Village Society. We appreciate everybody's participation. Allison, would you like to close?
Sure. Just want to encourage everybody to vote. Get those voter numbers up even higher than 11%. So thanks so much, everybody, for coming.
Lisa?
Yes, I think it was a great turnout tonight. Thank you everyone for attending and for our panelists, our candidates for being here tonight and making time for us. We did run out of space on our webinar, so we did go live on Facebook. So you can look for it on the VPIS page. We did have a live recording. I'm sure it'll be there after the fact. But again, thank you all. It was a great start. It was a great event.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.